I've got everything set up for soldering. Let's get started on these PCBs. Firstly, I'll start with the server. You can see it has an RTC instead of a DF player. Let's make sure that's on the right side of the board. Okay, that is the correct side of the board. I did have to solder with these pins a bit already, so I'll just clean that up so it fits nicely into those holes. Okay. Perfect. Now that RTC lies nice and flat against everything else, I do have some small solder bridges, but those shouldn't be a problem to clean up. Okay, now we'll just clean up each individual solder joint. Another solder bridge. Just trimming down all of the leads to make sure it's nice and compact. That'll probably make it easier for me to get at the solder bridge. That seems to be a very persistent solder bridge, and it is between ground and VCC, so that is not good. It seems that I have managed to scrape off a bit of the insulation, exposing the ground area. So I'm not exactly sure how much there is to be done about this. Okay. Well, I seem to have separated it. There don't seem to be any problems right off the bat. Yes, okay. So ground just has a bit of extra solder on it where it should be covered, and VCC is separated. I'll be really careful cleaning it up. Okay. I'll go and grab a multimeter to check for continuity. There should be no continuity between these. Ah, perfect. Okay, no continuity. That's good. Next, I will solder the linear voltage regulator. Now, this one's for the ESP to get the 5 volts from the High-Link AC to DC module down to the 3.3 volts that it needs. Okay. So it does appear to be a little bit too wide to go next to it without running into the High-Link power supply. But I think that I can get away with standing it vertically and just putting it next to it like so. Yes, that should work. Just keeping a little bit of space in there. Okay, I'll get that soldered in. Okay, and again, I'll just trim those leads down nice and short. There we go. Okay, still looking quite clean. Now I think, yes, I'll do the power supply module next. What a clean fit. Now this one should be quite easy. Nice large pins in comparison to everything else, that is. And I'll trim those down as well too. Okay, that one went a lot smoother. So now I have the RTC mounted as well as my linear step-down regulator and the high-link power supply module. Next, I think I'll try the pull-up and pull-down resistors. Shouldn't need anything to hold it this time, as the power supply is nice and heavy. I'll just go ahead and get the 4 resistors that I need. Okay, set that aside. Now how do I want to do this? It's just wide enough for each one, so I will bend the leads straight down on each side, and then outwards. This should make it quite easy to solder down to those pads. Yes, okay. I'll get some different tweezers for this. There, those should work better. Closed by default. Now, I'll go ahead and tin each side of the resistor. And then I will tin all of the resistor pads. Glad I made them that big, otherwise it would have been a nightmare. Now, I think I'll actually go ahead and trim them down a little bit ahead of time. Not to their final lengths, just enough that they don't run into or interfere with too many other things. And now I will place the first resistor down nicely on its pad. Okay, now I will be adjusting its positioning, as that's not quite on center. Okay, that should work nicely. Okay, now we'll go ahead and trim down those leads to their final length, if I can reach them. Very, very thin leads on these resistors. Now these pull-up and pull-downs are for the enable on the ESP and a couple GPIO pins that set its mode so that it's running and not being programmed, the flash and all that. Okay, that worked quite well. Now I'll do it with the remaining resistors. This time I will trim them down to their final lengths before putting them on the pads, as it was a bit annoying last time. Okay. That should be ready to go down onto the next set of pads. Okay, the leads are a bit wide, so I will push that in a bit and cut it back too. Okay. And just adjusting it for that second pad. And that's nicely connected. I'm wondering if I can get away with not bending the leads now, as it doesn't seem to be as much of an issue with clearance as I expected initially. So I'll try doing this one completely flat. Okay, and now the other side. It doesn't seem to be quite far enough over, so I'll just heat this pad up and move it over. Okay, now I'll get the other side. Okay, nicely soldered. Just double checking both sides to make sure they are fully connected. Okay, that seems to work quite a bit better. I'll do the rest like that then. Okay, the final resistor. And getting the other side of it. There we go. That was a lot faster. Okay. So those are all of the pull-ups for the server. There don't appear to be any shorts, although I will move this a little bit, or if I can. I don't seem to be able to. Well, that should be good enough. Just double checking that none of the connections are shorted or anything. Okay. Well, I seem to be on to the final component. The actual ESP. Now this one will be interesting. I've already been using this one in a breadboard, so I did have to solder leads onto it. Just make sure the bottom is nice and flat. But this is the one that I am slightly nervous about, as I will never be able to take this off again and reprogram it. I think, however, just as a safety precaution, I will only solder down the pins that are used, just to make it easier if I do ever have to reprogram this. Just getting that first pad connected might be a bit of a challenge. Okay, let's check the alignment. Almost perfect. Nudge it over to the left a little. Okay, that is as good as I could hope for it to be. Next, I'll be getting all of the connections that are used connected. Now this is a bit challenging, as soldering castellated pins down to a bunch of pads is a bit finicky, because you cannot have any shorts with neighboring pins. But I don't seem to have made any mistakes yet. Okay. Just a couple more. These ones are really close together, 4 in a row, I believe. So I cannot mess this up, or I would have to take the whole thing off and clean the pads. Just double checking that every pad that is used is soldered down. Okay. Not spectacularly clean soldering on those castellated pins, but they are very difficult. Just checking that I haven't missed any. Any that are used already had solder on them, so if I'm missing any, they'll have solder but no connection to a pad. That does not seem to be so. Okay, well that took a while, but this should be the first unit, the server unit, completed. Now I think I will check for continuity between some different pins to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Interesting. I seem to have missed the VCC pad, so it is not actually fully connected to the board. Or I should say at all connected. That should solve that. Now let's check it again. Good. Now I'll check my ground connection. Good, it's getting to the ESP. I'll just check ahead of time for the DF player. Let's see. Good. Okay. And the RTC. Good. No shorts. Now the 5-volt pin. Good, the DF player's getting it. And the linear regulator is... perfect! I see no reasons that this should not work. There do not seem to be any problems with the PCB. Next, I'll be testing all of the PCBs once I have made them. There's one module complete. Next, I have to make 3 of these client modules. I think, what will I do first this time? Well, I have the DF player, which needs to go in there. Its pins need to get bent inwards the tiniest bit in order to fit, about 0.4 millimeters. Okay. So it seems like soldering the pull-up resistors will be easier if I do those before the DF player. Then there is the linear regulator, which has to go in there. Again, it'll have to be just a tiny bit raised so that it doesn't run into the DF player, like I had to do on this module. Okay, so I think I'll do the pull-up resistors and then move on to the DF player. Okay, now I'll go ahead and get myself another 4 resistors. Very good. And I'll pre-tin all of the pads on this one again. Okay. Now, I'll try putting on all of the sides, or all of one side for the resistors. I guess that is in my way. Let's see. Okay, that should be close to where it needs to be. Okay. I'll always redo each of the connections once the resistors are secured, just to make sure that there are no bad solder joints. it seems to have stuck, but I definitely need a bit more solder for this next one. Okay, let's take a look at these solder joints and line up all of the resistors. Okay. Well, they all seem to be fairly well lined up. Now I'll do the other side. Well, actually, this first one is a tiny bit far over. So I'll just move that one up a bit. And then start soldering the other sides. Okay, and double checking the other sides, because I believe one or two of them may have been a bit weak. Double checking over here again. Okay. And all of those solder joints are done. They all seem to have a fairly good connection apart from this upper right one, which I will go over again. Very good. Now I will trim all of the leads and put in the DF player. Okay, those resistors look quite nice there. Now, the DF player, I'll have to make sure not to short out any of the leads with the pull up and pull down resistors, but this one should be quite a bit easier as it'll keep itself in place if I can get it to go through those holes. Again, those 0.4 millimeters too wide, just the slightest of a nuisance. Now, you can probably see now why I didn't go with through hole, as these resistors would actually hit the electronics on the DF player if I did so. Okay, so now I'll get working on soldering those pins. Now, not all of the pins are actually used, or needed for that matter. Just VCC, serial, and the speaker output. But you may notice that there are, oh, I don't know, 15, 20 pins on this thing. A lot of them are actually for analog control by buttons, but I will not be using that for the sake of compactness and the fact that this is all controlled serially. These pins are fairly fast to solder on, and I'm not getting many solder bridges, which is always nice. Okay, now that DF player is sitting flush with the PCB. Very nice. All of the pins seem to be connected quite well, and no solder bridges, so I'll just go ahead and trim off all of these pins. Again, this does have to be very compact, so those extra couple millimeters on each side will actually help quite a bit. Okay, look at that, very clean and compact. Now for the linear regulator. Again, have to bend those leads as the pin spacing is a bit different from the PCB. Squeezing them in a bit and getting them to go straight again. So that should narrow it down enough that it'll fit. Very nice, and I'll just dry fit this High-Link module just to make sure I won't run into it. Okay. I'll just pull on the pins through the other side of the PCB to make sure that it's nice and straight, and solder them. Now again, I have a solder bridge, so we'll just go ahead and get rid of that. This one seems to be quite stubborn. I'll trim the pins down and see if that makes it any easier. Also cut most of the solder bridge off. There we go. Much nicer. And the DF... Okay, everything seems to be quite nicely in place. Next, I should get... Oh, let's try doing the ESP this time. So this is the first client. The clients should never need any software changes, only the server should, as I have made the clients as universal as possible, apart from each one having a different number. I'll need to get a very secure grip on this. Okay, that's about as close as I could have hoped for now. I suppose I'll solder all of the pins for this one to make sure that I don't miss any. Now checking the alignment. How does that look? Quite nice. Okay. So I'll just go ahead and solder all of the pins. seem to have gotten better since last time. You can see that the solder's actually going fully under each castellated thing with very little difficulty. Again, making sure not to connect any of the pins that shouldn't be connected to each other, which is all of them. Okay, that side wasn't quite as clean, but still more than acceptable. Now I'll do the final side, and then I can move on to the high link modules. Okay, now let's check that there are no solder bridges. That would be catastrophic and frustrating. No solder bridges, and everything appears to be fairly well connected. That should be more than secure. Okay. Now, the high link module should slip right in here. Okay, now we'll just pin the PCB down as it is a bit heavier on this side and does want to fall off of the module. I'll actually just do one and then make sure it's pushed all the way down before continuing. One design consideration I made was to remove the copper area around the antenna. Hopefully that increases range in spite of the fact that I have a large circuit board or power supply on top of it. Even if that increase isn't too great, not getting a signal would be quite a bummer, but it doesn't have very far to go. Now let's see. Much cleaner than the last one, and the DF player, or I should say the clients, are a lot more compact as they don't have the whole clock hanging off the side. The power module fits in a bit better. I soldered that down a lot better, and these resistors look far nicer. Oh, that's going to bother me. I didn't put them all in the same way. Well, not fixing it now. Maybe I will for the next two. Okay. That one was took half as long as the first one. Don't think I'll get it down another half, but maybe a bit faster. Okay, grab 4 more resistors. Set that aside. Now, I will start soldering those resistors down again. Okay, I will definitely have to adjust that, but it only needs to hold down one side so that I can get the other one a lot better. Again, it will bother me that only two have their resistors the same way, but hey, guess it'll just be that way. Okay, now we'll get the other side of those resistors soldered down. This first one is definitely too far over. I'll go ahead and push it over a bit. Very nice, that was a clean one. Okay, very nice. Would be more compact if I did SMD, but I don't have the patience for that. And the final resistor, which is also a bit too far over. There we go. Now just going over the other side of these solder joints, making sure they're nice and clean. Very nice. Looks a lot better with all of them going in the same direction. Now again, I will just cut those pins off. Once I've bent them up, okay, very nice. Having them all face the same way definitely looks a lot better. Okay, next, the DF player. Make sure to put that one in the right way. Be a bummer if I didn't. Again, those pins just need to get squished in a tiny bit. And there we are. Again, very, very nice fit on that. Holds itself in since those pinholes were a bit too close together. Now I'll go ahead and solder all of these pins in, hopefully not making any solder bridges. Okay. There don't appear to be any solder bridges, and all of the connections seem to be very nice. Now I'll go ahead and trim down all of these pins, again, just to save space. Okay, very nice, very nice. Now I will move on to the linear regulator. Plenty of fun. Again, bending those leads up due to the difference in hole spacing. Straightening them out again. Okay, that should work quite well. Let's see. Perfect. Putting that high link module in just to make sure that it's not too close. Okay, very good. It isn't. Now I'll go ahead and solder that down. Okay, it does not seem to be too low on the PCB. No solder bridges, and it seems to be connected to all of those through holes. Now I'll just trim down the leads again. Seems to be plenty of trimming leads. Well, it's fun. Okay. So now I have that in place, and I have to put in the ESP, the second client. Okay. Always a bit of a challenge getting it positioned just right. Has to be very accurate. But I think I have gotten it in just about the perfect spot. So I'll solder that down, just one pin, and make sure I like where it is. Okay, all of the pins seem to be lined up quite well. It isn't lying 100% flat on the board, but I will fix that with a second pin just to hold it down. Make sure it's flat by pressing it down manually. Perfect. All lined up, laying flat. Now I just need to solder in all of those pins without making any bridges. Well, I'm definitely getting my soldering practice in today. And the final side. Again. Oh, guess I'll touch up that pin a little. Making sure not to bridge any pins. Oh, and I have a small bridge. Well, the very least I can say is that the pins are laid out in such a way, with such a spacing, that bridges usually just resolve themselves. Okay. That's very nice that I didn't have to spend an hour taking the whole thing off just to put it back on again. Touching up all of the pins, making sure there's no big solder blobs. Okay. That should be all connected. I'm not seeing any solder bridges, which is lovely. Now I just need to attach the high link module. Very nice, perfect spacing. Soldering down the first pin just to make sure it's nice and flat. Okay, this seems to be a bad solder joint, so I'll go over that one again. Yes, this one here. Okay. Very nice. Okay, very good. All of the pins on the ESP seem to be connected to their corresponding pads. That's great. Okay, second client done. I'll just be putting these in order. Server, client 1, client 2, and when it's finished, client 3. Okay, final set of resistors to solder. Let's not drop the PCB. Okay. Pre-tinning those pads makes it quite a bit easier. Getting out 4 resistors. And I've gotten 1 too many. Should be done with those. Now I get to solder down the last resistors. Again, just soldering down one side to hold it. I I should demagnetize these tweezers, it's getting a bit annoying. And let's see, almost got them all in the right order. Luckily that last one there didn't solder down fully. So very easy to swap its direction. Okay. Next I'll just make sure that they are all far enough over to this side for me to be able to solder the other pad. Okay, first one's good, second one's good, third one's good, and the fourth one is all lined up. Let's make sure they're all flat, and solder down the other side. Okay, all of those are soldered down quite nicely. Let's go over the first side, the one that was just holding it down, and clean those up. Okay, very good. Nice and clean, have them all going the same way. Now I'll just go ahead and trim off all of the leads. I'll tell you what, if the landlord ever finds these in my grandparents' apartment, they will be very confused. Okay, next up, the DF player. Bending those pins just 1/2 millimeter so they can fit. Perfect, look at that, lovely, snug fit. Okay. Now I'll get first pin soldered down. Okay, is it all level? Yep. Now we'll continue with the rest of the pins, hopefully forming no solder bridges. That would be nice. Making sure I've gotten all of them. Okay. Now I'll go ahead and get the other side. And managed to prevent that those last 2 pins from bridging. Now let's take a look. Very nice. Okay. No problems with those solder joints. Go ahead and trim down all of these pins. Very nice. Okay, that's all flush with the PCB. Pins are trimmed nicely, no solder bridges, good connections. All right, next I'll move on to the linear voltage regulator. Yay, another one. Again, bending those pins in just a bit, as these pins have a wider footprint than the PCB. Okay. Very nice. Okay. Not 100% straight, but that doesn't matter. I'll just put the high link module in again to make sure that there are no problems with spacing. And there aren't. Very good. Okay. I'll go ahead and solder that in. Okay, hopefully I don't make any solder bridges. And I didn't. Okay. Double check for spacing. No problems. Okay, that's very good. I'll trim down these pins. Make sure I got a good solder connection, which I seem to have. And now it's on to the ESP, the third client, and the final one. No solder bridges on any of the ESPs yet, but fingers crossed. Okay, I'll just solder down one pin once I get it lined up, just so that I can adjust its positioning. Okay, there we go. It does seem to be a bit off center, so I will go ahead and adjust that. I'll check that I didn't accidentally make a solder bridge there before I go ahead and connect any other pins. Okay, so it is connected to the pad, but not its neighbor. Very good. Okay. Now I will go ahead and solder that down to the board. Going over these connections to make sure they're nice and secure. I seem to have accidentally made a solder bridge, and that one cleared itself up pretty quickly. Again, these ESPs seem to be fairly well thought out. soldering the pins that are opposite to you does seem to be the easiest way with these castellated pins. Another solder bridge. Okay, so what's happened here? Oh, it's also connected to the case, so we'll try to get rid of the solder bridge. Okay, it is no longer connected to the case of the ESP. Now let's get rid of the solder bridge itself. Okay, got rid of the solder bridge, now just cleaning everything up a bit. Carefully, very carefully getting rid of that little chunk of solder that found its way onto the case. Bit of an awkward angle to show. But that seems to have mostly done the trick. Okay, I'll continue soldering those pins. Going over them a second time just to make sure. And the final row. No solder bridges yet. Very good. Still though, the board does seem to be ever so slightly off center, which makes soldering these pads just a bit harder. But they still seem to be good. Although I do seem to have made another solder bridge. But the ESP clears that right up. Okay. Just a few more connections to clean up. They don't seem to be fully connected with the pads under them. There we go. Okay. All of those pins seem to be soldered down fairly well, except these first two. I'll go over those again. Just to make sure, as they are fairly critical pins, I believe serial communication pins. Okay, very good. Now let's just check very carefully for solder bridges, and Okay, I have one between these two pins. I'll go ahead and carefully clear it up. It's a very, very small one. There doesn't seem to be a bridge anymore. I'll check just for safety. No. Okay, very good then. Finally, the high link module for the third client should be the last component I have to solder. Just tack that first one down and then make sure that it is all flat, which it is. Then I'll go on to the next 3 pins. They all seem to have fairly good solder connections, so I'll go ahead and trim them. And with that, I should have the server, client 1, 2, and 3. Very good. Well, I have to say for my first PCB design and soldering, this turned out spectacularly. Very clean on the bottom, and you know what? I think I'll just go back and tidy up these boards, making sure to put the resistors in the right way, because this will bother me if I don't. Let's see. I have brown at the top on these, brown. This one needs to be swapped. Okay. Solder the first side on. Push it down so it lies flat. And you know what? I will actually trim this lead down a bit as it is long. Now I'll go ahead and connect that right back up. Going over this side again just to make sure it's a good solder joint. Okay. Now this one needs to be swapped. again, just holding down that one side until I can solder the other. That actually seems to have made quite a good solder joint on the first side. And, oh, bit of a solder bridge there. Make sure to push it down so it lies flat. And that should just about do it. All of them in the same direction. That looks far nicer. So that would have been... Okay. Got them all in the right order again. Checking these. Okay. Okay. So I will need to swap 3 of these resistors around. Making sure not to make any solder bridges between the resistors and any DF player slots. Although it's not connected, there may be other components hooked up to that specific slot. Okay, now I will need to adjust this just ever so slightly before soldering it down. And again, going over the other side. Seems to be fairly good, but could use a small adjustment. There we go. Just trim it. Oh. It doesn't appear to have been soldered down. Well, I guess I'll redo that one. Now it has definitely been soldered. Okay, now on to the last 2 resistors. Okay. Making sure that it is a clean solder joint. Okay. Going over the other side again. And onto the final resistor. Go ahead and do the second side for it. Making sure to lay it down nice and flat. And there we go. This resistor seems to be quite unevenly spaced, so I will just bump it over a bit. And there we go. All of the resistors are the same way. That just makes me a bit happier inside. We have all of our ESPs soldered down. Actually, you know what? I'll go over the server one, as I didn't actually do every single pin. This should be nice and secure. Definitely won't be falling off accidentally anytime soon, not that it's in any high-stress situations anyway. Okay. And the final set of solder joints. I thought I said solder joints, not solder bridges. Make sure to clean up all of those joints. And the final joint. Very good. Actually quite clean, apart from this side, which I will go over again. And there we go. There we have it. All done. Wonderful. Now let's take a look. There don't seem to be any issues with this PCB other than that little wire sticking out there, which I will just bend back over a bit. Okay, that shouldn't be a problem. ESP's nicely soldered, so the server's good. Client 1. Very nice. Okay. No issues there. Decent soldered joints. Decent soldered joints. Okay. The first client's good. Let's see the second one. Okay, good joints there and there. DF players held down nicely. Linear regulator, yep. The ESP has some pretty good joints on it. Okay, second one looks good. And the final client. Let's see if I can find any nitpicky details to complain about. No. It seems that I have finished all of the modules. Very good. Okay. Next up, testing.